Welcome back. Look at our beautiful quilt. You didn't think you could make a quilt, but here you are with your quilt top. Aha, looks so beautiful. I love it. So the next step is crucial because oftentimes people get stuck at this phase and they end up with quilt tops in their cupboards for years. We want to get this quilt quilted so that you can start enjoying it. To do that, you need to know how to make what's called a quilt sandwich. This is not a meal. This is literally sandwiching your quilt top in between the batting and your backing. So for this, you're going to need to choose a very cute backing fabric. This is always fun, picking something amazing that you love for the back. I've picked this cute moon garden bird fabric from Tula Pink. I thought, oh, it's got every single color on the front, in the back, and it's really wild, and I love it. And I thought, what a great compliment. But you can choose whatever backing you want. You're gonna wanna choose 4 yards of regular 44-inch wide fabric. And you need 4 yards because one 2-yard strip has to go on one side and another 2-yard strip has to go on the other. And you, just like I did, have to sew those 2 pieces together before you can start your quilt sandwich. See, I've pieced this in the back and I've done my best to match up the birds and some of that lattice work as best as I could. But you don't have to do this, especially if your fabric isn't directional or anything. Or if you can live with it, no big deal. And it's not totally perfect. You can see it's kind of off in some spots, but I think it's gonna look beautiful no matter what. So I want you to choose 4 yards of your favorite fabric and I want you to sew it right together down the middle, and that's gonna make up your backing fabric. Or alternatively, you can look for what's called a wide back at your quilt shop. So in our quilt shop, we've got a whole section of 108-inch wide fabric. And what that means is you can choose those for the backs of your quilts without having to piece them together. They're already 108 inches wide, big enough for a king. We've only got 60 by 60 here, so you'd have plenty left over. But if you didn't want to have that seam down the back of your quilt, you could choose a 108-inch wide back for your backing. The other thing to keep in mind when you're choosing your backing fabric and your batting is how and who is going to quilt this quilt. If you plan to quilt it yourself, and quilting is the act of sewing that quilt sandwich together with some sort of pattern, maybe it's straight lines, maybe it's just meandering, maybe it's a stipple. If you're going to do that yourself, then you can match up your backing and your batting to approximately the size of your quilt top. If you, however, are going to send it to us to get it long-armed, then you need to have a little more backing and batting than the front of your quilt. In fact, you want to have 6 extra inches of backing and batting on either side of your quilt. And I know that seems like a lot of extra fabric and extra batting, but the long arm machine needs that so that it can sew on and off of your quilt. So if you plan on getting your quilt long armed, make sure you choose enough backing fabric and batting that you've got at least 4 to 6 inches around your entire quilt. The other thing before you sandwich your quilt is if you're going to bring it to us or a long armer to have it long armed, you do not need to do this step. You do not need to bring the long armer your quilt sandwich. In fact, when you're getting your quilt long armed, we supply the batting. You don't need to give us that, and we'll go ahead even and piece your backing together if that's what you need. So if you're getting it long armed, this is the stage you bring your backing and your quilt top to the shop and you pick out your beautiful design to go across your quilt. But if you're going to quilt this quilt yourself, this is where you have to pay attention. In this video, we're going to make the quilt sandwich and get it ready to be quilted. So here's what you're going to need. Yes, your beautiful backing fabric, your quilt top. I've also gone ahead now and chosen my binding. So this is what I chose that will go against the front of the quilt, kind of giving a little nod to what's to come on the back. You're going to need your batting. You're going to need some masking tape, and I'm going to spray base this quilt. There's two ways to baste your quilt. You can do it sort of the old-fashioned way, which is to use bent safety pins and pin the sandwich together all over the quilt. And then as you make your way around quilting your quilt, you take the pins out. It's very laborious, but some people swear by it. Or you can use a can of basting spray. This is what we're going to do today. It's a lot quicker, but the trade-off is you have to watch just to make sure when you're quilting that your needle doesn't get too gummed up with some of the glue that is sandwiched in between your quilt layers. So I'm always watching. If I get a little buildup of glue on my needle, I'm just wiping that off, a little bit of alcohol, and so that it doesn't build up on my needle and cause the thread to break or anything like that. So I just watch for that, making the basting method perfect and way quicker than the safety pin method, in my opinion. So that's what we're going to do today. The other thing you need is a lot of space. You might want to do this on the floor. If you don't have a giant table, I'm lucky here I have a big giant table, so I'm going to do it on the table. But if you don't have a big giant table, just move stuff out of the way and do this on your floor. All right, let's get going. You want a big open space with nothing in the way. Put on my new favorite bracelet, my masking tape. And what I'm going to do is spread out my quilt top. So if you're working on the floor, put your quilt down on the floor where nothing is touching it. Okay, I've laid out my whole top. I'm going to take my masking tape and I'm just going to tape it down in the corners and maybe across the top. I don't want it to move on me. So this is just low tack, like masking tape. You could use painter's tape, washi tape. Do your best to make sure there's no wrinkles. If there is, spread it out. Wear comfy clothes for this step because, you're going to be getting your steps in and probably be sweating by the end. Okay, now let's get your batting. If you've purchased pre-packaged batting, it may be much larger than your quilt. That's fine. You can trim it off at the end. So open your batting right up. And it's okay for it to go over the edge of your quilt because it's all going to get trimmed in the end. So you don't need to try to line it flush or anything like that. In fact, you want it kind of just floating in the middle. And this is why it's important to have it taped down, because as you're moving this batting, you don't want your quilt top getting wrinkled or moving around too. So just take a minute. I kind of like to do a lot of this kind of thing. If you have someone at home that can help you, a second pair of hands is always good, because then they can be flattening out one side while you're doing the other. Team effort. But if it's just you, you can do it too. You'll be getting your steps in. And I'm not too worried about some of the fold wrinkles that are in here. I can see a bunch of fold wrinkles. It's fine. It's going to be sandwiched in my quilt, so no big deal. Now I'm going to take my basting spray, set it on one side, and I'm going to fold just the first bit, the first half of the batting down, just to reveal the top half. And then I'm going to give it a shake, and I'm going to spray just the top half. Read the spray directions, but just kind of coat it. And then fold it back over top. Nice and smooth. Try not to put any wrinkles in it, but you also want it to be laying flat down. So now, whether you're working on the floor or the table, you need to lift up the back half and spray it now. So mine's kind of dragging over the edge of my table here, no problem, so I'll have to do it in 3 steps. But if you're working on the floor, you'll just do it in 2 steps, the top half and the bottom half. So peel back until you can feel that spray kind of give. It's temporary adhesive, so it's not like super crazy sticky. You can peel it away and reposition. but you'll feel it when it's there. And then grab your basting spray, and now you're going to spray this half. And you guessed the next step, pull it down. Now, careful where it lands, because the softer and more even you lay it down, the less flattening out you'll have to do. You kind of start in the middle, work your way out, get the air out. Try not to put any wrinkles in. Now, here I kind of feel a bit of a wrinkle, and so I'm going to check. Just pull it up, and you can just pull it apart if you feel like you've got a wrinkle in there. And then you don't have to put more spray down. It's still sticky. Just even it out. And remember, you can always stop and restart this video or watch it all the way through and then go and do your basting. You can watch it as many times as you need to. Keep it on hand for future quilt sandwich making. Okay, so now since I'm over the edge of my table, I'm just gonna undo some of my tape so I can move it up. But if you're on the floor, you're probably done by now. If you're on the table, you might have to do some stages like me. Okay, with my tape off, I'm just gonna pull the remainder of what needs to be basted forward so it's laying on the table. Peel back what's left, not very much, and spray. Now I got a big wrinkle here. So I'm just gonna peel this back, just smooth it out. Mostly just from the fold in the batting being in the package. If you end up with a few little wrinkly spots, as long as the wrinkle isn't really in your quilt top, it should be fine. Okay, it's all basted. Now, I'm going to, since I'm already pulled down here, I'm gonna get my backing. You could start with the backing fabric face down too, and end with the quilt top. That's totally fine too. I just happened to have it down, so that's the way I went. And we're going to basically repeat this step, but this time spraying the batting down. I'm going to take care to make sure my seam is straight. Okay, same deal. Pull it away, about halfway. I'm gonna roll it down. Now the easiest way to get no wrinkles is to kind of, you know, like you're making the bed and fluffing the sheet. So you can lift up the corner and do the same thing. Nice and tight down. Is this fabric nice or what? Now, just have to do the top part. Remember, if you're on the floor, you're just doing top half, bottom half too. Pull down to where I feel it catch. Yep, out there. And spray again. Up. That's it. It's basted. Now you can confidently pick it up. It's sandwiched together. Now's the time to look to see if there's any really big wrinkles. You don't want to sew in any folds that you inadvertently basted together. Now, mine looks like, you know, a little bumpily, like ripply in spots, but that's okay. That's all going to smooth out in the quilting process. Basted, it doesn't look as flat as it does on its own, so don't be worried about that. As long as there's not a wrinkle or a fold. If you find a spot is just too lumpy, you can peel it up. The basting spray is still there, and just smooth it back down. Just be careful you're not putting any new wrinkles in another layer. The other thing you want to make sure you're not doing is stretching your fabric, like pulling it out and stretching it beyond where it's supposed to go. Once your quilt has been basted this way, it can't go to the long armor. So now you're responsible for quilting it. And that is going to be our next step.